Hey guys, it's Caden, and welcome to another amazing Autism Digest interview, where today we have a writer who's worked with several individuals, including the daughter of the late great Bram Stoker and James Patterson, and who was a Bram Stoker Award nominee who has used autism to help enhance his writing. Let's welcome JD Barker. Thanks for coming on, JD.
Hey, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
All right, my first question for you is, for those of you who don't know you, what's your story?
Wow. Well, that's a loaded question. I'm basically an overnight success that took 30 years to come around. In today's world, I'm a New York Times bestseller. I just hit the list again at number 2 with a book I co-authored with James Patterson called The Writer. And I've been working as a full-time author for 10 years now, as of November. Um, but I mean, dating back, this is an autism podcast. So I was born in the 70s, at a time basically where they didn't look for that sort of thing. They didn't diagnose anybody. I was kind of the weird kid they just, put off in the corner. And that's, essentially my entire, school career, elementary school, high school, growing up. I knew I was different. I wasn't quite sure why. I didn't get a diagnosis until I was 22. So I made it all the way through college, trying to solve that mystery.
Well, I was the same way, and I'm around that age, 20, 21, 22, so that's definitely inspiring. With that said, how do you think your autism has helped you in your writing career? I know for me personally, it helps me come up with various ideas for stories and articles. Does it help you in that way, or how does it help you?
It's funny because when I was diagnosed, I was working in the corporate world. I was a chief compliance officer at a brokerage firm, which is as horrible as it sounds. But I got to work with data, and I loved working with data. Problem was when I found a problem, I was essentially in charge of making sure every trade that we did through the firm adhered to rules and regulations, SEC, FINRA, those types of things. Studying data wasn't the problem, but when I actually found an issue, I had to go out and talk to other people. And essentially, it was a confrontational situation because I had to show them something that they most likely did wrong. I had to explain what they did wrong, and then we had to figure out what we had to do to fix it. I did great with the data, horrible with the people. My boss recognized the fact that I was good at my job, so he sent me to anger management classes, thinking that that's what the problem was. And I was sitting in the initial therapy session with this psychologist. We got about 20 minutes in, and she stopped and she's like, "Have you ever been tested for autism?" And I didn't even know what that was. Now, not really. I mean, I knew, like Rain Man, like little silly stuff that I learned through Hollywood. But other than that, I really had no clue. But after that, we did some testing, and we landed on a diagnosis of Asperger's syndrome. In today's world, you're just on the spectrum somewhere. But it answered a lot of questions for me because, I learned, like there were certain things that I was able to do, in a lot of cases, things I could do a lot better than other people. But there were other things that I was horrible at, like social situations or interactions. I had always been writing. It was one of those things that, my parents told me at an early age, writing is a fantastic hobby, but you can't make a living at it. You have to get a real job, which is how I ended up in the corporate world. But I would come home and I would write at night. And essentially, I worked for other people. I worked as what's called a book doctor and a ghostwriter. So people would hire me. They'd have a manuscript that was, halfway done, 70% done that just needed some work. And they'd bring in me as a hired gun to fix it and get it ready for publication. And I learned a couple of things. I did a lot of memoirs for a lot of famous people. I would sit down and I would interview them, transcribe those interviews, and then I'd have to write a biography or a memoir in first person in their voice. And I was able to do that. I could get into their head and I could replicate their voice on paper to the point where it sounded exactly like them. And I was able to do that with the written word too. If somebody put a text in front of me written by somebody else, I could pick up on the patterns that were there, the vocal cadence, the writing style, the pacing, vocabulary, and I could duplicate that and I could continue that story in their voice. At the time that got me a lot of work in that world, but I had no idea that it was actually tied to autism. I wouldn't be able to do that without autism. It's essentially the same thing we do when we go into a social situation. We mimic what we see other people doing. I was mimicking people on paper.
That's a really nice way to put it. With anything, we pretty much mimic what we see, and it makes it easier for people like us to do certain tasks and make sure they're of quality. Uh, the next question I have for you is, what was it like working with James Patterson when the top true crime authors in the country.
Working with Jim is a lot of fun. So he read a copy of my second book. It was called The Fourth Monkey. It was about a serial killer in Chicago. It was published by HMH, which is part of HarperCollins. One of the things they do with any big book coming out, they send copies off to all the big name authors, just hoping to get that one sentence on the back, that they can use to market the book. And he read it and he liked it enough to pick up the phone and ask me if I wanted to work with them. That was, I'd have to check out, I guess, at least 7-8 years or so ago at this point, where we just started book number 6 together. So, initially we thought it was going to be one book, and now we're 6 in. Our latest one is called The Writer. It just came out in March, debuted on the New York Times list at number 2. We're having a lot of fun. He's a fantastic guy to work with. He's teaching me a ton, not only on the writing side, the craft side, but also the business of being an author. So that experience has been priceless.
Yeah, I bet. And I see back there you have a book called Something Keep Upstairs.
Yeah, it's
There.
called Something I Keep Upstairs. That's my next solo title. It comes out on May 13th. It's a haunted house story, but the tagline for the book is, "For a haunted house to be born, somebody has to die." So you know where they're going, but it's all about the journey.
Yeah, that's definitely an amazing concept, and we'll be on the lookout for it. My last question for you is, what's your advice for anyone, neurodivergent or not, who wants to go into the writing industry?
You have to read a lot. I've never had any formal training as an author, other than what we get in school. But I've read from a very early age. I was reading by the time I turned 3. By the time I got into kindergarten, I had read all the Hardy Boys and Nancy Drews, and I'd moved on to Charles Dickens and stuff like that. I've been reading my entire life, and I think because of that, just like with anything else in my world, I look for patterns. So when I read a book, I see the pattern in the structure, which is essentially a 3-act structure. If you were to actually study it, but I've never been taught that. But I've read it enough where I recognize that pattern. So when I'm writing a book, I understand, where twist needs to happen here, the climax needs to start here. And if I don't hit those benchmarks, it feels like I almost missed a turn on a highway going to some destination on a road trip. But for people that want to become an author, I think you have to read every single day, and I think you need to write every single day. Writing is very much like going to the gym. You have to develop that writer muscle. You have to exercise it every day, and if you do, it gets stronger.
Yeah, that's a really nice way to put it. All right, guys, that's going to do it for this interview. Thank you so much to JD for coming on today. If you guys want to see more amazing interviews, be sure to like, comment, subscribe, and be sure to check out JD Barker's Something I Keep Upstairs when it comes out on the 13th of May. Thank you guys so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.